This is the Mathematics Education Podcast from mathedpodcast.com. Welcome to the Math Ed Podcast. My name is Sam Otten from the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri, and today we have an episode that is cutting across 3 time zones as I'm joined by Erin Turner and Higinio Dominguez. Erin Turner is an assistant professor in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Sociocultural Studies at the University of Arizona. Thanks, Erin, for being here.
Oh, you're welcome.
And Higinio Dominguez is an assistant professor in the Department of Teacher Education at Michigan State University. Thanks, Higinio, for making the time for this as well.
My pleasure.
So we're going to be talking together about their article that's appearing currently in the Journal for Research in Mathematics Education. The article is entitled English Learners' Participation in Mathematical Discussion, Shifting Positionings and Dynamic Identities. But before we get to that article, I'd like to ask everybody to just describe their grad school experience and their dissertation. So Erin, I'll start with you.
So I went to grad school at UT Austin in Austin, Texas, and focused on elementary mathematics education. My advisor was Susan Emson. And my dissertation focused on really fleshing out the idea of teaching mathematics for social justice in a middle school mathematics classroom. I worked with a 6th grade math teacher in New York City over the course of a year to develop different curricular units that brought together the core content that she needed to teach as a 6th grade mathematics teacher and salient issues in the students' school community and surrounding neighborhood community, and that allowed them to use mathematics to investigate those issues, and in particular to look at issues of equity and social justice. And we looked at the learning and the participation that resulted in from those units.
Mm-hmm. And Susan Emson is involved in the current study that we're going to be talking about as well?
Yes. So the current study was a study that we conducted. I did a short postdoc at UT after graduation, and it was the focus of the research that occurred during that postdoc period.
Okay. And Higinio, can you tell us about your dissertation and grad school experience?
Sure. I also had the pleasure of working with Susan Emson as my dissertation chair at the University of Texas, Austin. The title of my dissertation was The Discourse of Mathematization, Bilingual Students Reinventing Mathematics and Themselves as Mathematical Thinkers. What I did is I visited 25 homes of Latino bilingual elementary students, and I interviewed them and their parents about all the familiar experiences in English and in Spanish that the kids participated in. I used that information to create mathematics problems that reflected those familiar experiences, as well as mathematically equivalent problems, but with unfamiliar experiences. So what I learned from the results is that when they solved problems in Spanish, the way that they talked in pairs as they were solving problems, their conversations reminded me a lot of the concept of exploratory talk, and they were also collaborating a lot, and they were together, they were taking risks when solving problems that obviously they didn't have the solution for. They were more risk-taking in the Spanish versus in English. Other contrast in English is that their talk was reminding me a lot of the calculational discourse. And also, the way they solved problems in English was very individual, as opposed to the social way that they were solving the problems in Spanish.
Your background interests really do seem to intersect with this article, or this article is situated at the intersection of your interests. So I was wondering if you could just say a little bit more about, what personally has driven you to focus on English learners and to focus on mathematics discourse.
So before coming to grad school, I was a bilingual classroom teacher in Phoenix. I taught in a dual language program with students that were native Spanish speakers and others that were native English speakers, and all were developing bilinguals. And we used a standards-based curriculum, and so one of the goals of my mathematics teaching at that time was to have kids solve problems and discuss problems. And I noticed as much as I tried to orchestrate discussions that have really broad participation, the language of the discussion seemed, so sometimes the discussions were in English, sometimes they were in Spanish because we followed a fairly strict dual language model, but the language of the discussions really seemed to impact the kind of which students were elevated to positions as active participants and which students really withdrew and were less active participants. And I wanted to understand better all the time that I was teaching how to orchestrate those discussions so the participation was more equitable. And so in graduate school, and then particularly when I finished and we had this postdoc research experience, we had the wonderful opportunity with Susan Empson to design an after-school program that really allowed us to look at mathematical discourse in settings where kids spoke both languages or one language or the other and were at various stages of bilingualism. And it really, it was wonderful because it was a way that I could connect back to these issues that had been, in some sense, burning since I first started teaching.
Well, I am also an English learner. I came to this country as an English learner in my mid-20s. And so that in itself, the age that I came to this country makes a difference. When I think about what I have observed, in the school age, the elementary Latino kids, in that I believe that I came to the U.S. with a more developed voice and a sense of who I was, and so that sense, and that developed voice made me think about how little the elementary kids talk particularly during the mathematics class. And so I saw this in numerous elementary classrooms, not only in Austin, but in Chicago where I did my postdoc. So I started really, organizing my ideas about the importance of discourse and giving the students an opportunity to participate in mathematical discussions. When I went to visit those 25 homes, and at the same time I was seeing how in classrooms the students were participating in very different ways as opposed to the way they were participating, in their homes. And I became very, very interested in studying more, the discourse patterns and the opportunities for students to engage their voices and their ideas more in a way that would resemble how they participate in their homes, but in the context of the elementary school classrooms.
And as both of you are pursuing these research interests, you've used the theoretical lens of positioning to really, dig into the issues in the classroom and to look at the students' roles and the students' voice and the students' participation. So I was wondering if you could just help us understand that perspective of positioning.
So, positioning, the way I see it, after writing, co-authoring this paper with Erin, I think we are doing at least a couple of things with the construct of positioning. On the one hand, I think we are using it to get a description of the Latino, the bilingual students' participation in mathematical discussions. That description obviously gave us, the results that we have now in the paper, and in a sense of how the students participated through multiple ways that they were positioned, and also multiple ways in which they positioned themselves and others. But I also see positioning more than simply describing what happened. So in that sense, the description part, I see it more aligned with an interpretivist perspective. But I am also seeing positioning as a way to consider change, what is possible in classrooms that include English learners. So obviously our results show that by shifting the positions that were available to English learners and to their peers, we were able to see how all of them, English learners and non-English learners, were able to share and to consider everybody's ideas and to challenge those ideas. And so that part of the analysis, when we use positioning, I really believe that it's more aligned with a critical theory perspective, because again, I think our analysis shows what is possible in those classrooms.
So you're saying as you're really looking in these mathematics classrooms and at the discussions, you're not only seeing what's there, but you're also kind of using that as a springboard to imagine what might be different or other possibilities. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
So yes, I see positioning as possibilities, as this idea of what is possible, and the possible is, for me, is always informed by what I see these English learners, what they do in contexts that are not the school classroom. So again, this analysis reminds me again of what I saw the kids do in their homes, and how there in that environment, how the parents were positioning them really helped them behave in very productive ways, in very engaging ways. And so they were responding accordingly. They were taking on those positions, those agentive positionings at home, where the parent, would request something or challenge something, and so the students, would respond accordingly. And so for me, the possibility is always illustrated or illuminated by how these students interact in other contexts with other adults, and how they are capable of being productive and being engaged in discussions, not necessarily mathematical, obviously, but how they participate in very agentive ways in non-school environments.
And that's where I think positioning is so powerful, because it can help us to understand the nuances of how kids are being set up in relation to task, how kids are setting up one another, setting up themselves. And I think that depth of analysis is really critical, both to understand what's happening in the moment, but as Higinio said, to also understand what might happen differently, and how we might construct these interactions or restructure these interactions in ways that elevate all of the knowledge and resources that English learners bring to the table versus marginalizing them or making them not relevant. Mm-hmm. And I think in our analysis, we look at positioning both as talk, so the kinds of things that teachers say, the things that students say, but we also look at other features of the discursive environment of the classrooms, so things like norms about what languages are appropriate for group discussion, for public group discussion, expectations about how one shares one's thinking and what are expected and appropriate ways of responding or clarifying ideas. So all of those elements of the discursive environment we saw as part of the story of how English learners are positioned by others and how they position themselves, and is important to our analysis, really.
Mm-hmm. And so let's dig into that analysis a little bit more. But beforehand, can you just help us get the context of the study? So this took place in an after-school mathematics program, is that right?
Yes, we ran an after-school mathematics program that met twice a week for about 10 to 12 weeks in elementary school, and the student participants were all 4th and 5th graders. And we ran two separate groups. We had two classrooms that were kind of a math after-school math club type setting. And kids were both recommended to participate because they were struggling in mathematics, or teachers thought they might benefit, or because the students themselves were interested. And across the two classrooms, we had a good number of English learners. There were also students that were native English speakers that knew very little Spanish, and then there were students that really were very dominant in Spanish and were beginning to learn English, and other students that were farther along in their development of English. So there was a real range of language backgrounds.
And when you wanted to investigate student positioning in the mathematical discussions, what data did you collect from those after-school programs?
So we videotaped both sessions. We had a camera that followed the teacher at all time and captured whole group interactions between the teacher and students, and then that followed the teacher from small group to small group. And then we also independently videotaped small groups when they were working on problem solving. The general structure was the teacher would pose a task to the whole group, children would work on the task in partners or individually in small groups, and then they would pull together at the end of each session to discuss what they came up with, what their strategies were, and what they discovered about the problems. We also had student notebooks, but primarily we based our analysis for this paper off the transcripts from the videos.
And I imagine that yielded a lot of data. So how did you narrow down the scope for something that you could tackle in this article?
There's a long story to that.
We'll probably go for the short version if there is one.
The short story is we first summarized each session and we chunked it into interactions. And the summary of each interaction included who participated and a general sense of what that participation looked like. And that allowed us to... We had previously selected case study students, which were 7 English learners from across the two groups, and that allowed us to quickly identify each instance of each of our case study students' participation. And then we selected instances where they participated in what we called agentive problem-solving ways. So if their participation was limited to just saying the answer, saying yes, or saying I agree, we didn't include those in our analysis, but times when they shared their thinking, when they commented on another student's strategy, when they justified something, when they made a claim, those all counted as more agentive participation. So that resulted in about 65 episodes, and each episode was a sustained interaction around a particular strategy for a particular problem. So some episodes were 4 or 5 minutes long, others were 12 or 15 minutes long, but we then just analyzed those 65 episodes for this paper.
And so what did you focus on with that analysis?
So we started with a subset of the episodes, and several members of our research team coded the same subset of episodes, and we paid attention to how things were said, so the language, whether they were presented with gestures and diagrams, kind of the context surrounding students' ideas. We paid attention to moves that teachers and students made to do kind of reflexive self-positioning or interactively to position one another. So setting up somebody as having a valuable idea or setting up somebody as not having a relevant idea, whatever the positioning looked like. We only looked at episodes that were in group discussions. I should have noted that earlier, but so all of these episodes were public group discussions and involved
the whole group.
Or at least half the class. We had some times where the class was split in half, but they were public discussions. And we made that decision purposefully because we think that the kind of positioning that happens publicly really over time has the potential to impact how kids begin to see themselves and how they begin to see one another. The coding of the episodes was then, we analyzed across episodes to distill patterns, things that were happening repeatedly that seemed to be consequential.
I'm speaking with Erin Turner and Higinio Dominguez about their article that they co-authored with Luz Maldonado and Susan Empson. It's appearing in the current special equity issue of JRME. So having done that analysis and looked at the video of the after-school program and particularly focusing on the 4th and 5th graders, what were some of the different ways that you saw students participating in the mathematical discussions, the public mathematical discussions?
Well, the English learners in this after-school program participated in different ways. And also some of those ways were more common than others. And so I want to talk about what those differences could imply, but also I also want to talk about beyond the differences, what their participation implies. So, first of all, the most common ways that they participated in were things such as, when they explained their own strategy, or when they provided valid justifications for, again, their own strategies, and also when they stated what they were thinking about a classmate's strategy or idea. So to me, those, what's common, across those ways of participating is, there's something very relational in these ways that they expressed and also consider their peers' ideas. Less common ways that they participated included things such as making mathematical claims or making mathematical connections. Now, if we think about these less common ways, making claims and making connections, it seems to me that the student has to have a strong mathematical identity in order to engage in these ways of participating in mathematical discussions. And so this takes us back to considering where English language learners have been learning mathematics, and wondering what kinds of opportunities they have been offered in their previous experiences, particularly in the classrooms that they have been learning mathematics. So it seems to me that when we got the students in this after-school program, on one hand, yes, they were able to actively engage in discussions with other kids, including non-English learners. But on the other hand, the more challenging or perhaps more independent ways of engaging, such as making those claims and making connections, perhaps they were still becoming used to that way of participating. And so again, I really think it has to do with how many opportunities these kids had in their past.
And in most mathematics classrooms, teachers and textbooks are positioned as the ones that really supply the mathematical claims, or that draw the strong connections. And so, there's quite a strong tradition, I would say, of positioning in mathematics, education in that way.
Right. And we don't know a lot about students' experiences during the school day. We worked with them in an after-school program, but I think we can suspect that by 4th or 5th grade, these students may have had many years of not being asked to come up with their own claims, or not being asked to be the ones to generate the mathematical connections, and instead to have all of that come from teachers or textbooks, as you're saying. We were inviting new forms of participation for a lot of these kids. So the whole setup of the after-school program wasn't necessarily the setup of their classroom during the day.
Mm-hmm.
The other dimension of these findings in how they participated in different ways, I really think it goes beyond differences. And I am saying this because what I think what we see in these different ways of participating is a good sense of what they were talking about. In other words, they knew what they were talking about, whether they were explaining their own ideas or whether they were considering somebody's ideas, or whether they were providing justification for their own ideas. And so to me, that's really, really relevant for creating a sense of mathematical understanding and helping them develop a strong or stronger mathematical identities. The fact that they were showing and demonstrating that they knew what they were talking about.
So in the article, you present 3 episodes focusing on particular students, but you draw out some of the themes that you saw looking across the data. And I was wondering, Higinio, if you could talk a little bit about the theme that emerged of the role of Spanish?
Certainly. I believe the use of Spanish in our after-school program was deliberate, unfortunately, it is something so persistent among teachers, and that is the teachers and also peers tend to notice what English learners don't know yet, or what they don't have yet. So it is very common, that English learners become visible for teachers as well as for classmates for not knowing English. Now, this visibility creates, at the same time, creates an invisibility, which is, peers and teachers don't necessarily see the mathematical ideas and the strategies that these students are capable of. So, thinking back, in our 3 cases that you mentioned, particularly case 1, which is the episode where Ernesto, an English learner, is explaining his strategy for finding 6 equal parts. And so one of the students, a non-English learner, Corinne, wants to respond to that idea, to that strategy that Ernesto presented. And so Corinne asks, can he understand English? So for me, her question really revealed the visibility that I was talking about and that we mentioned in our article. The first thing that is noticed about English learners is, again, they don't know the English language. Can he understand English? However, in this episode, after that question, the question actually served to create a series of positionings that started with the teacher saying, yes, he does, and also, adding to that by saying, in case he doesn't, then, someone in our group can help him understand this idea that Corinne has, and vice versa. We can help everyone, understand what he's just said. So the use of Spanish in this after-school program, I believe, changed the visibility of English learners as, someone who doesn't know English to someone who really knows powerful mathematical ideas.
So I'm going to refer listeners to the article because there really are some rich excerpts of data, some nice transcripts where you can start to hear the student's voice and really get a sense of the interactions in this after-school classroom. But just to pull out another theme for this episode, so Erin, I was wondering if you could say something about the teacher's role in having the students share their ideas, clarify their ideas.
So there's another example in the article. It's a case constructed around Felipe, and one thing that happens when Felipe is sharing his strategy is that the group initially doesn't make any sense of his idea. He's describing how to partition things, he's solving a fractions problem, and students really challenge him and say it doesn't make sense, and where did you get these numbers? And one thing that the teacher does is she immediately kind of responds by saying that Felipe does understand his own idea and that what Felipe is saying really makes sense to him, and she validates that experience is something that goes beyond just Felipe or beyond just an English learner, that kind of can happen to all of us at some time, but that we understand our own ideas, but other people might not be able to make sense of them, and that it's our task collectively. So she positioned the group as having the task of really understanding what Felipe was saying. So she brought them all into conversation with Felipe versus just allowing them to say, Felipe, your idea doesn't make sense, and let's move on to something else. And then as the conversation continued, she repeatedly kept Felipe in that role as somebody that is doing something sensible mathematically, and helped other students ask questions of him to pull out the idea, and helped scaffold his contribution so that he could clarify what he was doing. And ultimately the class did make sense of his thinking and his strategy. And what was really nice is that the moves that she used, some revoicing moves and some really strategic questioning moves, maintained Felipe in the position of being the one that was doing the mathematical work, and he was the one that was doing the clarification, versus she could have just taken over, for example, and explained the strategy herself for the class, and that didn't happen. And so there was a really nice way of keeping him in that active role while helping everybody to understand his thinking.
We're discussing the article English Learners' Participation in Mathematical Discussion, Shifting Positionings and Dynamic Identities, which is in the current volume of the Journal for Research in Mathematics Education. I was wondering if there was a particular takeaway point or a final thought that you wanted to leave with the listeners attached to this article.
One thing that I'll just say briefly is I think that we found that there were two dimensions to the positioning that were really critical, and one was how English learners were set up to have many and repeated and rich opportunities to contribute their ideas. So the classroom was set up in a way, and the teacher through her talk invited students in a way that really opened a space for students to share their ideas in English or in Spanish using gestures in all different ways. And that's something we've heard about a lot in the literature on English learners and mathematical discussion. But I think what has had less attention, and this was something that we discovered to be a really important dimension of our analysis, was how the other students are brought into that conversation. So it's not just about giving English learners a chance to explain their thinking, but it's about helping the other students in the classroom, including maybe other English learners, but the other students to orient to that English learner's idea and to begin to see that English learner as somebody who has really worthwhile mathematical ideas to contribute, and something that that the class collectively could learn from. So there was this dual work of the teacher to position the English learners in particular ways, and also to bring other students into conversation with the English learners' ideas. And to me, that's one thing that I really took away from the analysis and I found powerful.
Mm-hmm. For me, the main takeaway is I think after this experience, I am more sensitive, perhaps more careful about how I approach interactions in mathematics with any student, not just English learners, but I am very aware of the fact that the questions I ask, the tasks that I bring to an interaction, the opportunities that those questions and those tasks offer to students really can make a difference in how I position my students. And another important takeaway is in the sense of the work that I do as a math educator with future teachers. So I am constantly reminding them and reminding myself of the kinds of opportunities that we provide students, diverse students, to understand mathematics and to understand themselves in relation to mathematics.
I'm speaking with Erin Turner and Higinio Dominguez, and I do want to say, too, if there's a listener that's interested in hearing more and getting some insight into some other research about particularly Latino and Latina students, I'll refer them to episode 1201 with Bill Zahner. Just a quick plug there. Before I let Erin and Higinio go, though, I want to ask them one more question, which I ask all my guests, which is to get away from math education for a second. If you weren't in math education, what would you be doing? And I'll maybe start with Higinio.
Oh, I would love to be a fashion designer.
Oh, really?
Yes, I really think that the work that they do is so fascinating. They are into creating something different, which, they want to have an identity. They want to be known for, what they do. They are also into what's possible. So they like to take risks. Every year, every collection, it's a new challenge for these people, these designers. And it's also a very dynamic profession. So again, they are very connected to what's going on in so many different areas of people, work, what people like, tastes and changes and trends and colors and so many things that it makes the profession so dynamic that I think is very fascinating. It's a very important profession that it has a lot to do with this idea of positioning. They come up with a new product, and we gravitate, some of us, towards what we see, and so that in turn sort of like help people to position ourselves, and others to position us, depending on our likes or what we wear and what we do with those fashions. So.
And Erin, we're curious about you as well.
So I think I would also be doing something different from math education. If, as much as I absolutely love my work, I think I would be a midwife, which probably sounds odd, but I have 3 children. Had such a wonderful, wonderful experience having them under the care of a midwife, and found it to be such an empowering experience for me as a woman, and I think in general how midwives relate to women and families really just positions women as knowledgeable about themselves, about their bodies, about their families, and really gives them a sense of agency that in my experience hasn't been typical in kind of the medical community. And so that would be what I would be doing.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so I'm a very atypical case because I was actually born with a midwife in a farmhouse in northern Michigan in the Upper Peninsula.
Nice.
Yeah, so I was actually born right in the house, and that's the same house that I grew up in. So it's always been kind of a unique thing for me to have that.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
So I've been speaking with Erin Turner from the University of Arizona and Higinio Dominguez from Michigan State University. Thanks both for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.